Good day, everyone. How are you? I hope you all are hale and hearty. Well, I'm Satinder Kaur and today I will be taking up Lesson 2 of History for Class 10. And the name of the lesson is Nationalism in India. Let's understand what nationalism is. Well, in simple words, we can say it is devotion and loyalty to one's nation. To be more precise, it is identification with one's nation and support for its interests. In this lesson, we will explore that how the Indian National Congress under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi sought to develop the national movement and how various social groups and classes were brought together to participate in the national movement. We will also explore various other factors which helped in creating the feeling of nationalism in Indians. So let's start the story of Indian nationalism from 1920s and take a look at the main events of the time that created a new political and economic situation which gave a boost to the national movement. First of all, let's talk about the First World War, Khilafat and non-cooperation movement. The First World War started in 1914. India was a British colony at that time. The war led to a huge increase in defense expenditure of the British. This was financed by war loans and by increasing taxes. Custom duties were raised and income tax was introduced to raise extra revenue. Prices of items also increased during the war years. The prices doubled between 1913 and 1918. The common people were the worst sufferers of this price rise. Forced recruitment of rural people in the army was another cause of widespread anger among people. To add to their woes, crop failure in many parts of India resulted in the acute shortage of food. Influenza epidemic further aggravated their problems. According to 1921 census, about 12 to 13 million people died because of famines and epidemic. Just at that time, a charismatic leader emerged on the Indian scene and gave a new turn to the freedom struggle by adopting new modes of struggle. Children, I'm sure you all know who that leader was. Yes, he was Mahatma Gandhi, who came to India in 1915 and adopted a unique method to fight the oppressive British rule. Children, have you ever heard the term Satyagraha? That was Mahatma Gandhi's biggest weapon. It emphasized the power of truth. He advocated that physical force was not necessary to fight the oppressor. He tried his method at several places. In 1916, he traveled to Champaran in Bihar and inspired the peasants to struggle peacefully against the oppressive plantation system. In 1917, crops failed in Kheda district of Gujarat, but the government refused to give any relief to the peasants. Gandhiji organized them and his method of satyagraha yielded positive results. In 1918, Mahatma Gandhi intervened in a dispute between workers and mill owners of Ahmedabad. He advised the workers to go on a strike and to demand 35% increase in wages. All these movements proved successful to a great extent, and thus Gandhiji decided to adopt this method of satyagraha to launch a mass movement. Children, now we will talk about Rowlatt Satyagraha, which was launched by Gandhiji in April 1919 to protest against the unjust Rowlatt Act. under which the political prisoners could be put in jail without a trial. The purpose of this act was to curb growing nationalism in the country. When the Rowlatt Act was passed hurriedly through the Imperial Legislative Council, despite the opposition of the Indian members, Gandhiji's patience came to an end and he launched a nationwide hartal on 6th April 1919. Local leaders were picked up from Amritsar and Mahatma Gandhi was barred from entering Delhi. On 10th April, the police in Amritsar fired upon a peaceful procession, provoking widespread attacks on banks, post offices, and railway stations. In the view of these attacks, the British imposed martial law. Now, children, what was martial law? It was an act which stated that no more than two persons can form a group and meet at a place. This was done to prevent any form of a mobilized protest against the ruling authorities. And this coincided with the Sikh festival of Baisakhi, means it was a Baisakhi day when this happened. A large crowd had gathered in the enclosed ground of Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar. Some of them had come to attend a meeting to protest against this repressive measure of the government, while there were many others who had come to attend the annual Baisakhi fair. General Dyer entered the area, blocked the exit points, and opened fire on the crowd, killing hundreds of people. Many died when they leapt into a deep well to escape bullets. In history, this incident is known as Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Angered by this unfortunate incident, people started attacking government buildings, but Mahatma Gandhi was in favor of non-violent mass movement. Although Rowlatt Satyagraha had been a widespread movement, it was still limited mostly to cities and towns. Mahatma Gandhi now felt the need to launch a more broad-based movement in India. In his book Hind Swaraj, he declared that British rule was established in India with the cooperation of Indians, and if Indians stop cooperating with the British, Swaraj, that is, self-rule, will be established within a year. But he was certain that no such movement could be organized without bringing the Hindus and Muslims together. By that time, the First World War had ended with the defeat of Ottoman Turkey. There were rumors that a harsh peace treaty was going to be imposed on the Ottoman Emperor, who was the spiritual head, that is, Khalifa of the Islamic world. The Muslims of India decided to force Britain to change her Turkish policy. A Khalifa committee was formed under the leadership of Maulana Azad, Azmal Khan and Hasrat Mohani. A young generation of Muslim leaders like the brothers Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali began discussing with Mahatma Gandhi about the possibility of a united mass action on the issue. It was at that time that Gandhiji decided to launch a mass movement called Khilafat Non-Cooperation Movement. Now we will talk about the differing strands within the movement. First, we will talk about the spread of the movement in cities. In cities, the movement started with the participation of the middle class people. Thousands of students, teachers, principals, and lawyers boycotted the imperial institutions. Middle class people started boycotting foreign goods. Merchants and traders denied trading foreign goods and to finance foreign trade. However, this movement failed to sustain for a long time, and soon the movement slowed down in cities. And the main reasons for this slowdown were: first, khadi cloth was expensive as compared to mill cloth. Hence, the urban poor could not afford it and they started buying cheap mill cloth after some time. Second, alternative Indian institutions were slow to come up. As a result, the non-cooperating Indians ultimately had to go back to British institutions. So, the students started attending government schools again and lawyers joined back in government courts. Now we will look at what happened in the countryside, means villages or the rural areas. From the cities, the non-cooperation movement spread to the countryside. After the war, the struggles of peasants and tribals were developing in different parts of India. One such movement was against talukdars and landlords who demanded exorbitantly high rents and a variety of other cesses. Children, cess is a kind of payment or tax. So these cesses were being collected from the peasants. Peasants also had to do begar, means forced labor. The peasant movement demanded reduction of revenue and abolition of begar and social boycott of oppressive landlords. Awadh Kisan Sabha was set up, headed by Jawaharlal Nehru, Baba Ramchandra of Awadh and many others. And within a month, it had over 300 branches in various villages. Now, when the non-cooperation movement started, the tribals and peasants interpreted the message of Mahatma Gandhi and the idea of Swaraj in another way. For example, in 1920s, guerrilla movement started in Gudam Hills of Andhra Pradesh against the colonial government, which had closed large forest areas, preventing people from entering the forests to graze their cattle or to collect fuel wood and fruits. Although the inspiration of the movement came from Gandhiji, yet this movement was not similar to the non-cooperation movement, as Alluri Sitaram Raju, who was the leader of this movement, asserted that India could be liberated only by the use of force. Now let's look at how plantation workers responded to the movement. Under the England Emigration Act of 1859, plantation workers were not permitted to leave the tea gardens. Now, when they heard of the non-cooperation movement, thousands of workers defied the authorities and left the plantations to go back home. They believed that Gandhi Raj was coming and everyone would be given land in their own village. They, however, never reached their destination. Stranded on the way by a railway and steamer strike, they were caught by the police and brutally beaten up. Now, Gandhiji decided to withdraw the non-cooperation movement as it was turning violent in many places. In Chauri Chaura in the Gorakhpur district, which is in modern Uttar Pradesh, a large group of protesters participating in the non-cooperation movement clashed with the police, who opened fire. In retaliation, the demonstrators attacked and set a police station on fire, killing all its occupants, which included 22 policemen and 3 civilians. As a result, Mahatma Gandhi, who was strictly against violence, halted the non-cooperation movement in February 1922. He realized that the satyagrahis needed to be properly trained for the peaceful mass struggle. However, some of the Congress leaders like C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru wanted to contest elections, and for this purpose they formed the Swaraj Party. The party's program was to obstruct the government functioning. It voiced the grievances and aspirations of the people in the Legislative Assembly. However, the party could not continue for a long time. Its policy of obstructionism had its own limitations. Also, there were internal divisions among the Swarajists. Death of C.R. Das in 1925 further weakened the party, and now there emerged some other young leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose, who were in support of complete freedom for India through a more radical mass agitation. In such a situation of internal debate and dissension, two factors came up which shaped India's political scene towards the late 1920s. The first factor was the worldwide economic depression, and the second one was Simon Commission. The worldwide economic depression of 1929 had severe impact on India's freedom struggle. Due to this global crisis, there was a drastic fall in agricultural prices. The exports declined, and the farmers were not able to sell their harvest. In such a situation, it became difficult for them to pay taxes. But no relaxation was given to them. So, unrest among the people was increasing. Now we will talk about the other factor, that was Simon Commission. This was a commission formed by the British government in 1927 to suggest administrative reforms in India and to formalize the Constitution of India. The commission was headed by Sir John Simon. All the 7 members of this commission were British. Therefore, Indian National Congress and other political and social organizations rejected the commission and termed it as All-White Commission. When the commission arrived in India, it was boycotted by Indians. People protested against the commission and shouted slogans of "Go back, Simon." Prominent Indian nationalist Lala Lajpat Rai led a protest in Lahore. The protesters were lathi-charged by the police. Lala Lajpat Rai suffered a lathi blow during the protest and he died due to his injuries. The economic depression and the resultant socio-economic and political tensions intensified the anti-imperialist mood, making the civil disobedience movement inevitable. But before starting the movement, Gandhiji sent a letter to Viceroy Irwin stating 11 demands. It was an ultimatum to be fulfilled by 11th March, failing which the Congress would start a nationwide movement. But Irwin was not willing to negotiate or to agree to any of the demands, and so the movement started in April 1930. The main idea behind this movement was to disobey civil laws, demands and commands of the government. The movement was started by Gandhiji with the Salt March, better known as Dandi March. By implementing the enhanced salt law, the British had made it illegal to sell or produce salt without paying this tax, which affected every Indian. In the Salt March, Gandhiji with his 78 followers covered a journey of 240 miles in 23 days and reached the sea coast near Dandi village to produce salt without paying the tax. Gandhiji broke the British law by picking a small chunk of salt from the sea coast. Children, now the question arises, why did Gandhiji choose to break the salt law? And the answer is because salt was a necessary item which was used by all, rich and poor, and Gandhiji wanted to unite the masses through a common cause. Although thousands of people participated in the civil disobedience movement, yet there were some social groups that were not moved by the abstract concept of Swaraj. First, we'll talk about Dalits. Dalits or untouchables had long been ignored by the Congress because of the fear of offending the Sanatanis, the conservative high caste Hindus. Dalit leaders organized themselves and demanded reserved seats in educational institutions and separate electorates for legislative councils. They thought this would solve their problems. Thus, Dalit participation was limited in Maharashtra Nagpur region. Now, let's talk about Muslim participation. After the non-cooperation movement, a large section of Muslims felt alienated from the Congress. Relations between Hindus and Muslims had worsened. There were communal riots in various cities. Efforts were made to bring two communities closer by solving the problem of representation but failed. A section of Muslims remained alienated from the Congress and did not participate in the civil disobedience movement. They feared about the status of Muslims as a minority within India. Now let's see how the civil disobedience movement was different from the non-cooperation movement. In the non-cooperation movement, people were asked to boycott British goods and institutions, whereas this time the masses were encouraged to break civil laws to register their protest. Another difference was that women participated in this movement in large numbers. As the movement spread, salt was manufactured in many parts of the country, liquor shops were picketed, peasants refused to pay revenue, they violated forest laws. Now let's see how the colonial government reacted to this movement. Seeing that the movement was becoming a success, the government adopted repressive measures. A large number of people were put behind the bars. Many leaders like Abdul Ghaffar Khan, who was a close friend of Gandhiji, were arrested. Mahatma Gandhi himself was arrested. Enraged at this, people started attacking police stations, courts, and other government buildings. In this situation, Gandhiji decided to sign a pact with Lord Irwin. This is known as Gandhi-Irwin Pact. By this pact, Gandhiji agreed to call off the movement and the people who were arrested for protesting were released. Tax on salt was also removed. Gandhiji agreed to participate in the Round Table Conference, which was to be held in London. Children, Round Table Conference was a meeting where all major parties were invited to sit together, discuss issues and take decisions. But this Round Table Conference was a failure because of many disagreements among the participants. After coming back from London, Gandhiji decided to restart the movement, but it had lost steam by then. And finally, in 1934, the movement was officially called off. So children, I hope you've got a fair idea about the movements launched by Gandhiji. Now let's move further and talk about the sense of collective belonging. Nationalism spreads when people begin to believe that they are the part of the same nation, when they discover some unity that binds them together. Now the question is, how did the people belonging to different communities, regions or language groups develop a sense of collective belonging? So children, this was achieved partly through the united struggles and partly through cultural processes. We have already talked about united struggles. Now let's understand how nationalism captured people's imagination through a variety of cultural processes. History and fiction, folklore and songs, popular prints and symbols all played a part in the making of nationalism. India came to be visualized with the image of Bharat Mata. The image was first created by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. In 1870s, he wrote Vande Mataram as a hymn to the motherland. It was widely sung during the Swadeshi movement in Bengal. The idea of nationalism also developed through a movement to revive folklore. The nationalists began to preserve this folk tradition because they felt that it was essential to discover one's national identity and restore a sense of pride in one's past. In Bengal, Rabindranath Tagore himself led the movement for folk revival. Various symbols were created to instill the feeling of nationalism in people. During the Swadeshi movement in Bengal, a tricolor flag with red, green and yellow colors was designed. It had 8 lotuses representing 8 provinces of British India and a crescent moon representing Hindus and Muslims. By 1921, Gandhiji also had designed Swaraj flag. It was again a tricolor of red, green and white colors and had a spinning wheel in the center representing Gandhian ideal of self-help. The flag was carried during the marches as a symbol of defiance, means defying authority. The feeling of nationalism was also created through reinterpretation of history. The British saw Indians as backward and primitive, incapable of governing themselves. In response, the Indians began looking into the past to discover India's great achievements. They wrote about the glorious developments in ancient times when art and architecture, science and mathematics, religion and culture, crafts and trade had flourished. These nationalist histories urged the readers to take pride in India's great achievements in the past and struggle to change the miserable conditions of life under the British rule. But again, there were problems. When the past being glorified was Hindu, then people of other communities felt left out. So children, did you notice how growing anger against the colonial government brought people from various social groups and classes together into one common struggle, and how Mahatma Gandhi tried to forge a national unity through mass movements. But this unity did not emerge without conflicts. And this was so because freedom from colonial government meant different things for different people. So that was all about today's lesson, children. I hope you understood it well. Now let's take a look at the map of India and locate some of the important places that we read about in the lesson. The first one is Amritsar. Next is Chauri Chaura. Then we have Champaran. Next is Kheda. Next we have Ahmedabad. And the last one is Dandi. Now let's quickly recall what we studied. We first talked about First World War and its impact. Then we talked about Mahatma Gandhi's Satyagraha movement at Champaran, Kheda and Ahmedabad. Then we talked about Rowlatt Satyagraha, Khilafat non-cooperation movement, differing strands of the movement, events leading to civil disobedience movement, limitations of civil disobedience movement, and in the end we talked about sense of collective belonging and how it was created among Indians. Children, now it's time to move further and answer a few questions. First, we have some questions with two options and you have to choose the correct option. And the first question is, which was Gandhiji's first movement in India? And the options are Rowlatt Satyagraha or Champaran Satyagraha. And the answer is Champaran Satyagraha. Now the next question. Rowlatt Act was passed in 1919 or 1928? And the answer is 1919. Let's take a look at the third question. Jallianwala Bagh is in Amritsar or Uttar Pradesh? And the answer is Amritsar. Let's move on to the next question. Gandhiji wrote the book and the options are Hind Swaraj or Swaraj. And the answer is Hind Swaraj. The next question is, which two Muslim brothers joined hands with Mahatma Gandhi during non-cooperation movement? And the options are Abdul Ghaffar and Muhammad Ali or Muhammad Ali, Shaukat Ali. And the answer is Muhammad Ali, Shaukat Ali. And the last question is, what did the crescent moon signify in the Swaraj flag? The options are unity or sacrifice. And yes, the answer is unity. Now let's move further and answer some more questions in 1 or 2 words. And the first question is, who led the guerrilla movement in Gudem Hills of Andhra Pradesh? The answer is Alluri Sitaram Raju. The next question is, civil disobedience means? The answer is disobeying the civil laws. Now let's take a look at the next question. Name the viceroy Gandhiji signed a pact with. And the answer is yes, Lord Irwin. The next question is, how did Gandhiji start civil disobedience movement? And the answer to this question is with Salt March. Now the next question, Salt March is also known as, and the answer is Dandi March. Very good. Now let's take a look at the last question. When did the Congress officially call off the civil disobedience movement? And the answer is in 1934. Children, now I want you to do a little activity. You have to create a timeline of the main events of the freedom struggle that took place in the first half of the 20th century. And I'm sure you will be able to do that. With this, we come to the end of the video. I hope you liked it and got to know a great deal about the Indian national movement in 1920s and 1930s. That's all for now. I'll be back with some more videos. Till then, keep learning, keep smiling.